show always face. Sometimes that happens. So let me take full ownership, full stop, and full ownership that when I put it together, I thought I was doing the right thing. But you know what? Man plans, and God laughs. That's exactly where we were yesterday. So, for our loyal fans, we do hope that you come back and hope that this one snafu, as my father said, this one snafu of the shout out show is not indicative of the quality of the show. It is indicative of the lack of technological proficiency of its host. That's where we're going to start today. Today, brothers and sisters, you can see that we're not in our regular spot. We're not at our studio today. We're actually on location in Akron, Ohio. I just gave a lecture on equity, diversity, and race at the University of Akron. I want to make sure I give their programming board a shout out. Also, shout out to Sister Tiffany and Brother Tom, as well as Brother Tyler and Brother Isaac, who took me out to lunch today. Today's discussion, brothers and sisters, was really interesting because this talk is actually a carryover of a lecture that I just gave. And I was actually talking to Sister Sultana about this as well. It was really, really interesting to stand in front of young voices, young lives. We like to say full of hope, inspiration, and all those things. And in some regards, not being to be the bearer of bad tidings, if you will, but be the bearer of realistic expectations, and explaining to this young group, if you will, that I tried to be very, very articulate about the fact that I'm in front of you as African American, talking about race, diversity, equity, fairness, is largely a miracle. And it's a miracle because I'm able to carry the message that so many people have echoed who, in their lifetime and their existence, did not experience the joy of fairness and equity. Yet, the profundity of it is they still believed in it. When I say the profundity of they believed in it, meaning that speaking to almost a religious and spiritual nature of the people, indigenous people, African Americans, Latinos, speaking into existence that these things are inherent in us, even if the law precludes that we express them. Even if we deal with code, if you will, legalese that denies us these particular things, it's the miracle is that they still have presence. They still have gravitas in everything we do in terms of growing our communities, everything we have to do in terms of inspire our children and building future and building community. So, as we begin to get into this talk, brothers and sisters, I think it's really important that I explain to them that my issues with fairness and talking about fairness and equity have so much to do with the fact that in my honest states, if you will, my honest interpretation of it, I've seen it denied to so many people. I've seen it denied to so many people. I live with parents. I'm blessed that both of my parents are still living, but both of my parents came up through segregation, and for a portion of their lives before they were able to vote, and even after they were able to vote, they saw that this oppression was legal, and they saw that the whole idea of fairness and equity was meant for people that benefited from a certain process of law and jurisprudence. Today's talk, brothers and sisters, will be largely about how we have these conversations about fairness and equity. And the reason I'm saying this is because while I stood in front of these young men and women who are part of a leadership cooperative, what I felt, brothers and sisters, that I was speaking into a void. Sister Tana brought up something before we came on air that I do have to speak about, and it is the conversation about fairness and equity circumventing people, that there has been a process to somehow displace this concept in the space of creating a new reality. And that's something that I saw today. Like, it was a new reality for some of these young kids to hear. And let me just hear, but have to listen to an African American talk about a historical narrative that is not particularly pretty, number one, and flies in the face of what they've come to understand as America. Their 9/11 at this point in time is not a 9/11. It's not Hurricane Katrina. 9/11, brothers and sisters, was an insurrection. And being able to see that there was something wrong fundamentally with how people were viewing democracy. As I said today, earlier today, I said what was interesting is because you have to watch this through a prism that these were white people attacking white people in terms of an insurrection, and it was based on the fact not of color, not socioeconomic status or religion. It was based on the fact that absolutism is now the norm in terms of how politics is done and under the prism and scope of white supremacy in the United States. So listen, we're going to be back. I've talked a little bit live on location from Akron, Ohio at the Courtyard Marriott. This is Preacher Moss. Let's go ahead and start the shout out show. All right, we're back. First off, I want to make sure that we are back, that we are that we are actually on the air as opposed to the panic and the meltdown. And shout out, of course, to Sister Tana, and shout out to everybody that gave me a call or a text to say your show ain't on. I knew it wasn't on, but I appreciate you letting me know because I did early this morning on top of praying for those who are impoverished and those who need money and love and care and support. I said, please, Lord, help us with StreamYard. So let me again thank everybody for tuning in because, you have these situations. Like I said, it's not indicative of the show, the quality of the show. It's indicative of my shortcomings on this technological platform. Sometimes I get it right. Sometimes I don't get it right. So let's begin by welcoming everybody back to the show. Let's see who we got. Who do we have in the queue, Sister Tana? All right. Wonderful. Be safe in Ohio. Thanks so much, Sister Ree. Sister Ree is one of the shout out show soldiers that gave us a holler, let us know that we were not on the air. And I appreciate that. I don't know if people really understand how much I appreciate that because it said, hey, listen, I'm not doing my job. Yes. Hello, family, to you too, Sister Ree. Shout out to Derek. Shout out to Juwan, and of course, shout out to you. And we do have you in dua for your health, sister. Make sure that you are taking care of yourself. Do not overdo it. All right, next up, my main man, Altaf Rashid, Mr. 6 o'clock, straight up, straight down. A steady man. He's a steady Eddie for the shout out show. And even yesterday, my main man, Steady Eddie Altaf, could not find his show at his regularly scheduled program. My brother, let me apologize to you, but at the same time, wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Let me say thank you for tuning in, always being a supporter of the show. He is our Canadian ambassador, brothers and sisters. Make sure that the quality of the show is good on this side of the border and that side of the border. Appreciate you, Altaf. Thank you again. Next up, the Sister Ika tuning in all the way from Depok, Indonesia. That is Depok, Indonesia, not Jakarta, but Depok, Indonesia, trying to make sure that she's getting her piece in. We appreciate you, sister. Thank you so much. And peace and blessings to your family, your son and daughter. Thank you so much, Sister Ika, on the show. Next up, we have Brother Eric Carter. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. What's going on, E-Money? Good to see you on the show, brother. Good to see you expressing your right as a shout out family show member, a shout out family soldier. Thank you so much for coming on the show. And if you tuned in yesterday and you didn't find us on the dial, I apologize to you sincerely. We will try, or I will definitely try to do better because this was not on Sister Satana. Well, it kind of was because it was her suggestion. No, I'm just kidding. It was on me and I messed up. But thank you so much for tuning in. And hopefully we can get some comments today. Okay, we got a shout out for Sister Ika's daughter, Nadifa. Happy birthday, Sister Nadifa. She is 17 years old. You have to put that young lady to work. All right. Shout out to Sister Nadifa. Shout out to Sister Ika and the Ika family, the Ika clan. Thank you so much. Bilal Salahuddin. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, man. I appreciate you, brother. You know, man, we try and do these insights, man, and I try and keep it loose. I'm not trying to give goodbyes on the show, but sometimes, in the words of Imam Warthi Muhammad, there is a need and a placement for sober language. And as much as I love to tell jokes, and I will never stop until Allah says don't tell no more, there is the place for us to have an intellectual conversation and engagement and exchange and intellectual exchange, because we are smart people. I mean, we're people of faith. And when you're people of faith, a lot of times you are, exhibiting a high level of intelligence and intellectual capacity because you're able to think outside of your own existence and think about other people and your creator and the nature of existence. So thank you so much for coming on the show, brother. Next up, what's going on, Sonia Salahuddin Dalton? What's going on? Oh, you brother Bilal's wife. Okay, brother Bilal, I see you doubling up on us. I'm glad. Thank you so much for coming to the show, sisters. Now, let me explain this. Even though y'all are married, you have to earn your own status on the shout out show. Do you understand me? You got to get your own status, sister, before we make you an official member of the shout out. So now don't hate on Bilal. He's been here, he's got his stripes. We want you to get your stripes too. I'm joking, sister. You know what? Thank you so much for coming on the show and supporting us. God bless you, man. Allah continue to increase your success. And again, strengthen your spirit for all the things that we go through, good and bad. All right. Thank you, go. I appreciate you. And what's the show? What's the shout out show without Johnny L. Thomas, my little brother JT? He says, "Why leg my salon for two about a to preacher and Satana." You got to get the other banner up there, JT. Preacher and Satana. Look, I don't know if you came on the show yesterday, but if you came on at 5 o'clock, you were vastly disappointed in your brother because I did not have to show up. I had muffed it like a bad kick. I had muffed it. People looking for the show like they were looking for a mask on Aaron Rodgers. Couldn't couldn't find one. All right, I take that back. Sorry, Wisconsin fans. It was laying out there. JT, good to see you, brother. Good to see you. Thank you so much. Next up, and we have the choreographer of the shout out show, the consultant producer. How can we get sister? How can we forget Sister Sultana Whitfield? Make sure the show happens, even though it didn't happen yesterday. I want everyone to know that we were on the ball trying to get this thing up because you know how black folk be like, he ain't on his business. Forget all the 500 some shows I've done. It's it's a brother going, he wasn't on yesterday. So I apologize, but again, it's a learning experience, and I feel like in the future, when that situation happens, we'll handle it a little bit more accordingly. But for the most part, it is what it is. All right. Our subject today is having conversations about fairness and equity. Today, as I gave this lecture at University of Akron to this leadership group, predominantly white males and females, had a couple of young blacks in there, a few Asians. I had this overriding feeling that they hadn't been there before. Let me tell you what I'm saying. When I say they haven't been here before, sometimes when you're talking to somebody about an experience that you went through, some type of trial, tribulation, challenge, trauma, you can look at that person and go, I've been there, or that person's been there. And then that conversation is a little bit more cohesive, if you will. It's a little bit more robust. Today was interesting, but I started talking about fairness and equity. It didn't really necessarily resonate with the group that was in the room because this is a group that's been in the room and they haven't necessarily possibly been opened up and talked to about aspects of history. As I talked about issues of critical race theory and why it's important and how it affects everybody, like everybody has a right to have a critical theory about their existence, whether it's race, whether it's you have Latin crits, you have African American critical race theory. You have all this diversification. What was interesting was I was talking to a group that had yet to get through that, to go through that situation. That's number one. But number two, brothers and sisters, I felt like it hadn't been taught to them. I felt like in some regard that the nature of what we were speaking was over their head because it was all hypothetical. If you were to walk into a room and a group of people moved to the other side of the room, how would you feel? If you were to go to a store and person decided not to wait on you or to make you wait until they served everybody else, it was really hypothetical, and it felt like we were teaching in some regards. And this is something I have to be honest with. I felt like I was teaching in a telephone booth. And the reason I felt like I was teaching in a telephone booth, and anybody could jump in, largely had to do with the fact that um, there's something afoot. There's something kind of cultural of what I was saying, whereby if I was not there saying it, it's almost as if it didn't exist. And it was countercultural to them because no one's been saying in that space, you know? And also, I do want to take a moment to shout out the victims of the Astroworld catastrophe at the Travis Scott concert. Terrible, terrible situation. I don't know if I'm going to do a show about that because there's a lesson to be had when you have 50,000 people at a point in time where we're still talking about social distancing, which is it's an anomaly right now. Nobody's social distancing, and you have 50,000 people in a venue situated that was so tight that you would have a crush where people would move up towards the stage. Do you understand what I'm saying? Okay, so I'm going to leave that alone. But to get back to my point, and there's some subtleties here that you have to follow if you can't follow. I don't say you have to follow, but there's some subtleties here. When you watch conversations about fairness and equity, it does not match up with the present presentation or representation of fairness and equity. It's presented in the media and Instagram and commercials whereby fairness and equity has been happening all along. That fairness and equity is the picture we're going to, but it's being presented as a picture that's present. Like this is the picture. A couple of last year, I was talking about shows, and I said that there's been a proliferation of advertising that shows that the it's the displacement of the African American male as a father with an African American family. He can be an African American father figure, but not with an African American family. So you have these commercials, if you will, with a black father and a white mom doing gender reveals, or a white father and a black mom going camping. And I'm like, this is to me a little bit of a diluted effort to not really have this conversation about fairness and equity. Because I'm like, if you're having the argument about fairness and equity, half of it is half of your argument is, I want to say, muted because that partner in that relationship is not experiencing fairness and equity the way you are or the way your family has done previously or prior to that. When I looked at the class today, brothers and sisters, it was interesting, and I want to be careful about my language here because all these students have a right to pursue education, whatever field of choice they want to, religion, uh, love, gender. That's not my business. But what is my business is the way it's being presented in this vacuum is that it totally subterfuges everybody else who came before, everyone else who didn't get the fairness, everyone else who didn't get the equity. Let me go to the other side of the conundrum. The conundrum is we grow up with parents and grandparents who are forced to talk to us about fairness and equity, but in reality, we're not receiving it themselves. Meaning, their conversation has to be the greater good in the hope that at some point in time in our existence, we will have access to fairness and equity. We will have access to education that will level the playing field in some regards. We will have access to financial resources that will allow us the social mobility to move up out of situations or the situation that we're in. It allows us to invest money, invest resources to make that situation better. I didn't see that today. And for one of the few times, I felt like the conversation was heard but not felt. Let me say it again. It was heard but not felt. Heard is like I'm giving you permission to give me this information, but it didn't turn the heart. It didn't turn the heart. One of the joys when I was young is my mother worked for HEW, Health Education and Welfare at the time. It's HHS, Health and Human Services. She had a birthday party. I think the guy his name's Charles Smith, and at the time he was like, I don't know if he was the oldest living man, the oldest living black man, but he was 100 plus. And when he spoke about being a child growing up in slavery, as a child myself, I was floored. I was literally floored. I couldn't understand what he was saying because in my space, I had always been free. We could say limitation, segregation, but in some regards, when you closed your house or you closed your car, you had some semblance of autonomy. You could drive where you want to. You could drive where you want to within limits. You could be at certain places within limits. It wasn't full freedom; it was compromise. But here was a guy who was an ex-slave. He's born into slavery, talking about fairness and equity. And I have to say, brothers and sisters, that it was a very demonstrative reality that we live in la la land. We live in la la land. That our idea of freedom and fairness and equity is tied solely to our individual perspective. There's not a group perspective when we talk about it. Thus, when I was talking today with these young students, though they were leaders, there wasn't a group perspective, or I want to say a wisdom of the crowd sentiment where somebody goes, yeah, we can go with that. It may not be everybody, but the wisdom of the crowd, it in some regards compensates for those who may not believe. Prime example, vaccinations. If you have people, it's 10 people and 8 people have vaccinations, 2 don't. The 8 people who have vaccinations, the fact that they've gone through that in some regards, it compensates for the other 2. And this is what I mean. It compensates for the other 2 because that 8 being vaccinated means that even if they're around the other 2, even if they were to catch COVID, the fact that they had taken these vaccines means that it reduces the chance that they're going to give it to someone else. Or even if they get sick, it reduces the chance that they're going to be intensely sick or extremely sick or have to do hospital time. In the conversation that I try to have today, I literally felt old. And let me preface this by saying I know what my parents went through when they talked to me as a child about you could be anything you wanted to be. Because in some regards, their parents couldn't tell them that. And the reason their parents couldn't tell them that is because their parents' couldn't tell them that. Because it's a falsehood. I literally went back and looked at a lecture I did not recently, but at the beginning of 2000. And I literally went on a whole rant about why there could not be a black president, why we cannot have an organically black president. When I say organically black president, honestly, I'm not talking about Barack Obama. He was a mixed race child. Father was African and mother was white. So he had some of those sensibilities and some of those protections, brothers and sisters. He had some of those protections. And in that space, it began to arise me the fact that I felt that nobody can handle a black president because you couldn't look at a leader of the free country understanding the amount of trauma that had been visited upon this person to the point that them being president, hear me now, them being president was virtually impossible because you're looking at the work and the progress that you tried to undo. And you're looking at it from a leadership perspective. I once wrote a screenplay called Where's Malcolm When You Need Him? And the premise of Where's Malcolm When You Need Him was the fact that, There was a void in black leadership, and it becomes a situation. And I guess we could talk about this more on some of the other shows, whereby there's a redundancy in black leadership. If you're not producing new black leaders, you're going to put out the same old black leaders. And the more you put them out, the more they are disconnected to the youth, disconnected to the problems and the culture. Why? Because you're asking them to skip generations to be hip and cool and fit into and have an understanding of the problems of youth. You see, back in the times of King and Malcolm X and Medgar Evers, these were men who were in their 20s and 30s. And their connection to youth was extremely close to the 20-year-olds, to the teenagers. We don't have that. Thus, when we talk about these conversations of fairness and equity, people look at us and say, well, where have you been? Asking for a body of work in the context of having people speak truth to power about this is what America is, it's difficult. It's extremely difficult. I said it yesterday. I said it's interesting that right now, what's so un-American right now is that if you stand up and say this is not the way America is supposed to be, you will be branded un-American. The most un-American people in America throughout history are the people who said stand up and be America. Stand up, follow your Constitution. Stand up, follow your amendments. Stand up, follow your Bible. Follow the David Walker appeals. Do something to demonstrate that at least you believe in some regards that this equity and this fairness is across the board. Not all for some and none for others. I mean that is across the board. And as we begin to kind of meander even deeper into the situation, I say, well, where's the bottom of this thing? Where are the voices, as Imam Warthi Muhammad says, where are the people who will present sober language? Where are they? Because today I felt like as much as I tried to present sober language, I was alone. I was a novelty. Not to say that I wasn't purposeful, not to say there are people who communicate much better than me on these issues, but even then, they find themselves as novelties because we can't compete in some regards to the fact that Sister Satana said a generation has been skipped. This is a generation that looks at multiculturalism like it's always been around. I grew up where you better not be with that white girl. You better not be with that Latina girl. Don't you bring them around here. Don't you bring them to the cookout. Don't you bring them to Thanksgiving. Don't you bring them, period. And it sounds so racist. But it's not racist. When your grandmother told, don't you bring that white girl around here, and your mother said, don't you bring that white girl around here, they were doing it not out of race, they were doing it out of fear and protection. And so where are we now as we talk about this concept of fairness and equity? I don't know. Ironically, the lecture I gave, all of these kids were following a mask mandate. So all of their faces were covered. So you couldn't see who was laughing, who was smirking, who was talking underneath their breath. It was like surgery. And fairness and equity and race and diversity on the table. And it was an observation, and I had to make the case. And I can be honest, I'm not sure that I made the case. Or if I did, I'm not sure that I made the case to the right people. I pray that Allah blesses me for my efforts. I pray that Allah blesses the people that heard things. If it was an issue for me and I was incorrect, that's for my own nafs. If it was something that's good, that comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All right, let's go ahead and wrap up. Again, shout out, condolences to our brothers and sisters in Houston associated with the Houston Astro World concert. Loss of life, eight lives lost, and over 300 people injured. So let's see how that is mediated. So we have some words. Sister Sonia Selection, you talked previously about leadership and the lack of may play a role in society being unmoved and unmotivated to acknowledge the disparity, especially young generation. It's a great point, Sister Sonia. That's a very valid point, and I think Sister Zatana was kind of underscoring that well before off the air. And I guess I'm in a bit of a quandary. It's like, well, how do we flip this around? Is it flippable? How do we flip it around? Like, how do we renew? And I think this is something that maybe it's another episode. I know we're running over, but I think it's something that has a lot to do with the fact that I don't know how people are receiving information. So we got Sister Satana. I did it, Sister Satana. I did give condolences. Thank you. Sister Satana is on my case. But look, I don't want to hold people. I want to be brief today. Uh, Shout out again to University of Akron and your leadership conference. Appreciate you for having me. And of course, shout out to the Shout Out Show family and the soldiers for coming out and supporting the show, even though your boy dropped the ball. Yesterday it happens. Forgive your brother. Let's give a shout out also to BeFinanciallyIndependent.com. Again, that's BeFinanciallyIndependent.com. If you're talking about finances, if you're talking about financial advisors, if you're talking about I work for a dollar and I want to figure out how to make my dollar work for you, you got to call. You have to go to the website, BeFinanciallyIndependent.com, or call 1-888-496-6845. Again, that's 1-888-496-6845. Now, if you're interested in getting a quality, hear me now, a quality Islamic graduate education at the graduate level or the doctorate level, you got to go to Bayan Islamic Graduate School. Why? They're offering programs for Islamic studies and Islamic leadership, as well as Islamic education. And they have one of the premier programs, brothers and sisters, the Master of Divinity program with an emphasis on Muslim chaplaincy, one of the best in the country. So you want to make sure that you check that out. Listen, you guys have been amazing. Inshallah, I will be back to you tomorrow from the studio. Again, I thank you for your patience and your understanding for that yesterday's show. But it happens, brothers. But you know what? Allahu Alam. Allah knows best. So we're going to get out of here. Take care. Satana, go ahead and take us home. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Well, team, we've come to the end of yet another show. And I have to say, I had a good time, and I hope that you had a good time as well. Listen, at this part of the show, we have no more show. I could literally sing a song saying we have no more show. However, to spare all of us that embarrassment and chaos, I'm just going to say, please join us tomorrow here on the Shout Out Show, Monday through Thursdays, and every first Saturday, we do our Saturday Spotlight. Here we are again, 5 to 5:30 on the Central Time. And of course, we're going to do our rebroadcast at 8 o'clock Central, 9 o'clock p.m. And of course, that would be 6 o'clock on the West Coast. So, time for you to go, because it's time for me to go. I think I will do that song. Thank you for coming to the show. Thank you for coming to the show. That's all the lyrics I wrote. But you get the idea. See you tomorrow.